All right, welcome back, everybody. So, roster shuffling period has come and gone. The deadline has passed just about 24 hours ago, which means I'm going to be doing a mega review video where I go through each and every change that happened in each and every region's upper division through this big video so I can get you guys as up to date with everything that happened, just in case you missed anything over the past month and a half or so. And the way that I'm going to be going through this is I'm going to be going through the regions based on their major slots, meaning that China and Western Europe both have 4 slots for majors. So I'm going to be doing Western Europe and China first, then moving on to Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe, and then finally ending things off with the 2 Americas. So yes, this is going to be quite the long video. We have quite a lot to talk about, but this is just going to kind of be your massive video that is going to include everything that you may have missed over the past month and a half or so of time. And yeah, let's kick things off with Western Europe, where throughout the entire region, in comparison to some other regions, not a whole lot of changes, mainly teams switching out one player here and there. In fact, the only team that did not make any changes whatsoever are your defending TI champions, Tundra, who held on to their entire same roster. We still have Skeeter, 933, Soxa snaking, and even Owie, their coach, sticking around as well. Makes sense. They just won TI. No reason to change their roster at this point. But we start getting into some of the other teams where we do have those minor changes. First things first, Liquid, who had a slot to fill after Matumbaman went into retirement. He, of course, was playing position 1 previously, which means that they had a slot to fill there. They have gone ahead and moved Mickey over to position 1 and brought in Nisha, who had just left Team Secret just about a week and a half ago now to play mid. And I was talking about this yesterday. I've been talking about this a lot when I talk about this Liquid stack. I love how flexible they are when it comes to their positions. I mean, Boxy used to play off lane, now he's on support. We have Mickey, who has been able to play pretty much any core role. And even when the former iterations of Liquid were there, like for example, Koikva, even he was able to switch roles, playing off lane when Boxy was gone and Sumail was filling in for mid. So yes, just again, one of the benefits of having players that are this flexible is that you're able to get a player like Nisha where you otherwise maybe wouldn't have. Because if Mickey was strictly a mid player, which I know he isn't, he was typically a carry player first, but if he was strictly a mid player, then it would have been a lot harder to get Nisha if he didn't want to play carry. So yeah, other than that, Liquid pretty much unchanged. They did lose their second coach, Jirax, but overall, he wasn't with the team for a whole lot of time, and their main head coach is still Blitz. He is still a part of the team. So this Liquid roster, very much the same as last season, and I expect nothing less than what we got last season from these guys. These guys should still be easily a top 4 team in Western Europe. Moving on to OG, they also had a slot to fill with Amar leaving the team just a few days ago, joining Enigma Galaxy. He was previously on their inactive roster, but it was pretty clear that he was going to be leaving the team at some point, and they've gone ahead and replaced him with DM, who was previously with Virtus.Pro. Hell of an offlane player. I think OG and their fans are going to be very happy with this, especially because his hero pool is very similar to Amar's as well, though his play style isn't exactly the same. Amar usually plays that hard carry role in the offlane, essentially, with those offlane heroes. DM is still a player that you can first pick Timbersaw with, and he'll still destroy. He's still very much capable of carrying a game on his back, which OG fans will inevitably love. So yes, I like this move quite a bit, and other than that, that is the only change that OG has had to make coming into this season. Moving on now to Entity, who had to part ways with their carry Pure. He now finds himself on that new Dark Side stack in Eastern Europe, which is very exciting, but they did have to replace him, and they went ahead with Watson, who is a player that has been looming around the Eastern European Tier 2 scene for quite a long time, bouncing around on a lot of notable stacks, though never really having a team that he had been on for a long time, other than maybe Bait when Bait first came into the scene. But yeah, I like this move quite a bit. I know a lot of people are a little upset because Pure is a hell of a player, but again, with some of the controversies there, and whether or not Pure wanted to leave or the team wanted to move on from him, picking up Watson, I don't think is something that they should be complaining about. Watson is still a hell of a player, and we'll see how he does in the upper division of Western Europe. This will be his first real shot at a Tier 1 scene. I think he's played in Div 1 before in Eastern Europe, but I would really love to see him compete in this upcoming season. Next up, we had Team Secret, who, as previously mentioned, had to replace Nisha after he left the team. They have gone ahead and done that by bringing in Boom from Gaming Gladiators, who had a hell of a season this past year, especially, as I've mentioned before, in the early portions of last year when Gaming Gladiators won their regional finals, they won their regional tour. They have since had a little bit of a dip in their play, but overall, the team is still fantastic, and Boom was a very large part of why that team was doing so well. His Storm Spirit play was fantastic, especially as the start of the year, so we'll see how he's able to adjust on this new Team Secret roster. And I'm genuinely curious, for fans of this team, Are you guys happy with the overall lack of change in this roster? Like, only one player gone. It is Nisha. Inevitably, that's going to feel like a downgrade because Nisha is that good. But for fans of the team, do you wish that there were some more changes with this roster? I know that they went all the way to the grand finals of TI, but up until that point, they had looked pretty mediocre throughout the rest of the year. And so again, I'm just genuinely curious what your guys' thoughts are. Is that performance at TI enough to convince you that this stack is good enough, or do you wish that there would have been more changes? Okay, Gaming Gladiators. So yes, as previously mentioned, they lose their mid laner, Boom, to Team Secret, who had to replace Nisha. So they bring in Quinn from the now dissolved Quincy crew that is unfortunately dissolved. And he's going to be coming in to play mid, which I like a lot. Quinn has been a part of the NA region for a very long time, and he is a very, very technically profound, technically sound, technically spectacular mid lane player. He can dominate his lane in most games. I think that overall the Quincy crew stack wasn't one that was able to break through on the LAN scene, so I like that he's getting himself into a new environment. We'll see if he's going to be able to pick up where Boom left the team behind. And one more change that Gaming Gladiators had to make as well after losing their coach Immortal Faith, who we'll talk about next up on the board. They've had to go ahead and replace him with Danish coach CY. I don't know a whole lot about him. His Dota buff and his Liquipedia are pretty clean. I don't really see anything there. So we'll see how he does in this upcoming season. But either way, they picked themselves up a coach when they needed one, which is always nice. Enigma Galaxy, yes, Miracle going on break. This is going to be their first time as an org that they're going without Miracle for an indefinite amount of time. He, of course, has missed a few games, a few tournaments, a few matches throughout the years as well. Like last year, he missed the first 3 or 4 series that Enigma had in Tour 1, which without him, things were pretty bad. But they've gone ahead and replaced him with Amar. He's going to be playing that carry role that he's been wanting to play for a very long time. So we'll see how that ends up doing. Again, very, very similar situation with Secret and Nisha. It's going to be very hard to replace a player like Miracle with that individual skill. But I believe Amar is a step in the right direction. I think that he can definitely aim to be that player and hopefully elevate the game of all of those around him on his team. So I like this move a lot. And of course, as previously mentioned, Immortal Faith coming into coach after they had let go of Roman, who had been a part of this stack for even longer than Enigma had been around. He's been coaching with the stack back from Team Liquid in 2018. So he ended up parting ways with the team. Immortal Faith comes in as a new coach. We'll see if that's going to be able to shake things up a bit for Enigma. They've been in a bit of a slump ever since it feels like the COVID era. They haven't really been themselves. They've had glimpses of greatness like last year at the Animajor, but ultimately it has meant that they have not been able to make it to TIs 2 years in a row now. So we'll see if this ends up being the difference maker. There is a lot of time, a lot of points to be won. So we'll see where they end up in, let's say, 9 to 10 months from now. And finally, the last team that we're going to be talking about in Western Europe. This is a new stack, not a new stack, a new team name, because these guys are the Into the Breach stack that finished second place in the lower division last tour. They were unfortunately let go of the org, meaning that they're going to be playing under their own name, which is, as of right now, Exit B. We'll see if they end up getting picked up by an org. It seems like most teams in the upper division of Western Europe do end up getting picked up by an org at some point. But yes, this roster is pretty much exactly the same as it was on Into the Breach, besides one change. That is with Ari, who is now in North America with TSM. He has been replaced by Eastern European player Immersion, who very recently was with Pari Parni, but also notably was with AS Monaco Gambit for over a year over the past couple years. So yes, I do think that this move is quite good. Ultimately, it sucks that they have to get rid of, that Ari ends up leaving that team, and they have to make some changes, especially after the season that they just had. And it also sucks that now that they're in the upper division, they get dropped by their org, but we'll see how they end up doing. I do like this move quite a bit. I don't think that it's going to be detrimental in any way to this squad. And we'll see if they're able to keep their heads above water, because we have seen this Western European region very difficult to crack into the top 6. It is very easy for you to qualify for Div 1 just to get sent back down to Div 2 immediately again. We have seen it time and time again. And so for Enigma Galaxy as well, we'll see if they're going to be able to break through. The one thing that is concerning regarding that, though, however, is that a lot of these teams that have really set themselves up as dominant teams of the region haven't made very many changes. So there's not going to be likely any drastic drops in quality from any of these top 6 teams either. So yeah, it's going to be a bloodbath, and I'm very excited for it, which now leads me into our next region that we're going to be talking about today. I've got 3 boards prepped, and then I'm going to be switching boards once again to talk about Southeast Asia after this. And yeah, we're going to be talking about China now, which actually has quite a lot of changes in comparison to that. The last region that we were just talking about, Western Europe, with quite a few new stacks, including the first one here, which is going to be Knights. I've ordered this based on where teams placed in the Tour 3 of last season. Knights, previously known as RNG, who sold their stack to this, sold their DPC slot to this new stack of players, consisting largely of a bunch of tier 2 players from the scene that have been either coming in from SEA or China. We have Ego, who first of all was last playing on Shenzhen, which is a team that has been playing in Div 2, doing quite well in Div 2 as well. So that's a nice pickup. We have Alacrity, who is also popular for playing on Enigma Galaxy Southeast Asia. He was their mid laner for the past year. Looked pretty damn good doing it. He's a meepo player, which means I'm always gonna have respect for him there. We then have Flyby coming into play. He was last on Sparking Arrow for over a year. He has been since bouncing between RNG and Sparking Arrow for the past couple years leading up to this. We then have Felix Xiaoba, who's coming in from RNG on oh no, he was on RSG. Either way, he's coming into play position 4. We have XCJ, who's coming in from Fusion Rune, and then we also have Sparking Arrow Gaming, a team that he has been a part of over the past couple years as well. So yes, this kind of is a bit of a hodgepodge of a bunch of Div 2 and, Tier 2 and Tier 3 players from the past couple years, from a past few regions like SEA and China. But still, I like this roster quite a bit. There's quite a bit of promise in here. We'll see if they can end up being an underdog of some sort in this region that is pretty wide open right now. And as you'll see, there are a lot of green. There's a lot of green here, which means there's a lot of changes, which means this region could end up being very, very volatile in the coming few months. I apologize for the glare there. I'll try and move it so there isn't as much. Okay, yes, next up, let's talk about Aster, who had to make some roster changes as well. We, of course, had Ori, who went into retirement. He was previously their mid laner, meaning that they had a slot to fill there. Lucky for them, they do have a team that is affiliated with them. It's generally regarded as like a sister team, a B team of some sort, so that's exactly what they used it as. They picked up the mid laner from Aster Aries, XWY, and he's going to be playing mid for them in this upcoming season, which is pretty interesting because when we talk about Aries, they've now picked up White Album again, and we could have had White Album back on the main team, but for now, we just have XWY there. The rest of the roster looks largely the same. We have Monet, XXS, Bobica, and Siamese Cat filling out the rest of the roster, but there is a new coach here. We are going to be having Lonum stepping down as coach. That happened quite a while ago, and ROTK, a player that really needs no introduction at this point, legendary Chinese player who has been coaching for the past 5 years or so, is going to be coming in to coach this new stack, Aster Aries. And notably, the last time ROTK did coach was about a year ago with Elephant. He has taken the past year off, so we'll see if that has done him some good. Hopefully it has, and he can jump back into the scene with some new, fresh ideas with this new squad that he's going to be coaching. Okay, next up, Extreme. Extreme, definitely a team to look forward to, I would say. They had a fantastic roster last season. They just barely didn't make it through those last chance qualifiers, which was a pretty big disappointment. Taking a look at their roster, they should have been one of the teams going through, but ultimately that did not happen. That is just kind of how TIs and tournaments generally work. Sometimes things just work, sometimes they don't, and they could not dodge the roster shuffle. They send Lou over to YBB, which very similar to Aster, and Aster Aries is kind of like a sister team for them. They send him down, and they ultimately also lose Old 11, which you would think would be a pretty big loss, but then you look at the players that they bring in, Ghost and JT, and you think, okay, that actually could work, because I think this roster now looks better than it did just a few months ago. JT, of course, legendary offlane player with Invictus Gaming, had been with that org for over 3 years, a very, very long time. And we have Ghost, who came in to play carry with RNG over the past couple years, bring them more of that stability that RNG really, really needed last year, and overall just looked fantastic doing it. So Extreme, definitely making a case for being potentially the new top dog in China, which is very, very exciting. We'll see if that ends up being the case. But now let's talk about the team that I think people are going to be talking about the most and had to go through quite a lot of roster changes, and that is PSG.LGD. They, of course, on position 1 had Ame, who is now on an indefinite break. He's still a part of the organization. He's just currently inactive. So I'd imagine that once he wants to play again, PSG.LGD will sub him back in, which would really suck for Shiro because he's just that disposable. But I mean, it's Ame. You're going to want to put him in. So we've got Shiro replacing him. He was previously on eHome for the past couple years, or past few months, I should say. He has looked pretty solid doing so. Probably not as good of a player as some of the other carry players in this region, but can definitely work towards that. And definitely when it comes to PSG.LGD, I will never doubt the rosters they put together. They have been at the top of the Dota 2 Pro circuit for such a long time. I just can't doubt them. Nothing to say returning to play mid. We then, of course, had Faith Beyond, who went into retirement. They have now brought in Zhang Yu. That is just how you pronounce his name. He does not actually have an English written name currently. It is written in Mandarin, and I can't read that, so I'm going to be reading it as Shang Yu until he gets one, or until we figure out what to pronounce him. He, of course, had been playing with CDEC for the past little while, who had a pretty fantastic end of last season, I gotta say. Even though CDEC will not be participating in this DPC, he made a good name for himself there. And we have Planet coming in to play position 4 with Jin Q leaving the team after his contract expired, which I'm surprised that PSG.LGD didn't want to hold on to Jin Q. They replaced him with Planet, who's also coming from eHome, same as Shiro. But either way, playing position 5, we still have Y, aka Innocence, who's going to be playing, from what I can tell, under a new tag called YU Smile. That is still the same player. And then coaching, we still have Zhao Ba coming in as coach for PSG.LGD. So yes, what do you think of this stack? Do you think that these guys make it to the first major? There are 4 slots in China total, which means there's technically a 50-50 chance that they make it. Do you think that this roster is good enough to finish top 4? I would love to know your guys' thoughts about that, because I think this is one of the biggest roster changes that we've seen heading into this next season when it comes to just overall magnitude. Okay, let's look at Aster Aries now, where, as previously mentioned, we have White Album coming into play position 2 now. He's going to be replacing XWY, who has been brought up to the main roster. And other than that, that is the only change that Aster Aries is going to be having with their active players. They do have a coaching change coming up, though, and that is with 86 getting dropped for OP, who last coached RNG just about a year ago now, taking some time off, very similar to ROTK. So he's going to be coming in to coach Aster Aries. He has quite a long history of coaching in China, so overall I like this move quite a bit, and we'll see if Aster Aries is going to be able to get themselves to that first major, and if they can get themselves there alongside their fellow teammates over at Aster. I don't know if you could necessarily call them teammates, but you know what I'm trying to say. Okay, eHome. There was speculation that eHome was just not going to compete this year. They threw together a last-minute roster. They didn't have any players, and it looked like they were going to be yet another team that was going to be getting rid of their DPC slot, just like RNG, just like RSG in Southeast Asia. But no, they put together a roster. It is a pretty hodgepodge type roster where they threw together a bunch of players from the Tier 2 and Tier 3 scene. MKS is coming in to play carry for them. He was previously with RSG in Southeast Asia. We have Y Chen, who previously was on Neptune, who didn't exactly have a very good time in the lower division of China. So hopefully Y Chen looking for a bit of a bounce back this time around, especially since he's in Div 1 now. That's going to be quite the shakeup. We have Zhao Yu, who was also with RSG this past year. We have Salad, who was on LBZS for over 2 years before joining the squad. In fact, I do believe his Liquipedia still says that he's still a part of LBZS. And finally, LWW, who has been a part of Phoenix for quite a long time, although he hasn't been with Phoenix since near the start of 2022. Either way, a player that has played in Div 1 before, so we'll see how he's going to be able to do in this upcoming season. This is definitely a big shakeup for eHome, which overall as an org feels like they've been really having a hard time finding that identity, having a hard time finding those players that are going to define them as an organization. And yet again, yet another season, they're coming into this with a fresh new roster. So yeah. Next up, we got our 2 teams coming in from the lower division, the first of which being Dawn, who picks up that DPC slot from CDEC, who will be stepping away from the pro scene in China right now, which is unfortunate to hear. They are an org that has been around for quite a long time, TI5 finalists. And yeah, they sell that squad, that DPC slot to a new stack of players coming in known as Dawn Esports. Their carry player MS is going to be coming in. He has been a player that has been bouncing between Sparking Arrow Gaming and YBB for quite a long time in his career leading up to this. So again, a tier 2, tier 3 player that is going to be coming in to play mid. We then have X, who's coming in, who has been a part of LBZS, though he has not played with LBZS in quite a long time. We then have Son Goku, who's coming into this. He has also been with Sparking Arrow Gaming for quite a long time. Dalkres has no competitive record on his Wikipedia. I am not exactly sure who he's played for. It looks like in his results tab, he's played for a bunch of teams that are in the tier 4 or tier 5 scene of China. So this is going to be a pretty big leap for him. Luckily, he's playing a role like position 4, which isn't as consequential as maybe playing mid against some of the best mids in your region. But still, that's going to be a pretty big leap for him. We'll see how he adjusts. And finally, to play position 5, we have I Don't Care, who also has been bouncing between Sparking Arrow Gaming, YBB, and also LBZS throughout the past couple years in his career. So yeah, this is a pretty interesting looking stack. I don't know how much faith I would necessarily put in them to finish top 4. I definitely think that their odds for making to a major are very slim. But are they a top 6? Do they end up staying in this region for the next season? Again, a lot of volatility to come within this region, a lot of changes. We could see a completely wide open Chinese DPC scene for the next season, which leads me into our last team here, a team coming in from the lower division who probably shouldn't have ever been there to begin with. I mean, if we're being honest, their stack was just absolutely insane when it comes to talent. They had finished top 4, top 6 at TI10 heading into that, and then they just had a really disappointing season, and that is Invictus Gaming. They do have a pretty solid Tour 3 that gets them back up to Div 1, thankfully. But yes, we have Emo, who is the only remaining player from their roster that is going to be sticking on their roster, and he's switching from mid to carry. He's going to be playing carry from now on. Hopefully this is some sort of shakeup that the team could really use at this point. But again, given that they finally found their footing, they finally got themselves back up to Div 1, it is unfortunate that they've lost a large portion of that roster that got them there. Following that, we have Dust coming into play position 2, mid. He's previously been on Magma for quite a long time, which is a team that played in Div 1, had a bit of a tough time, but either way, still a solid team here and there. We'll see how they do this season. We have Irving coming in, who did play for Vici Gaming for quite a while near the early portions of last season. Since then, he's been bouncing around quite a little bit. We then have Paulison, who has played on teams like Negative Galaxy in Southeast Asia as well. He also most recently played on Team SMG for the TI qualifiers. That unfortunately didn't work out, but either way, he's going to be coming in to play position 4 with Invictus Gaming, which is very exciting. And they round off their roster with QYQX, who has previously played with Invictus Vitality in Div 2 in China. A team that has done pretty well, sometimes even outperforming the main Invictus roster in the lower division. But yes, they do end up picking up, which is kind of funny because we have in China quite a lot of teams that are related to one another. We have Aster and Aster Aries, we have Extreme and YBB, and we have Invictus and Invictus Vitality. So they're just kind of switching players throughout their rosters here and there. But yeah, this is an incredibly crazy region from this past year. It didn't seem like a whole lot was going to be going on in China. I mean, we really didn't hear any roster changes from the region for like 4 weeks after TI, and then a few players retiring here and there. But yes, this region looks wide open, and I'd love to hear your guys' predictions on who do you think makes it to the first major of the year. Is PSG.LGD still a major contender? Are they still in the running to make it to a major? And if they do, how far do they make it? Will it depend on how they do? Probably. But ultimately, I'd love to know your guys' thoughts. And yeah, that means we're going to be finally moving on to Southeast Asia, which is going to be the last board that I do before I end up cutting this video and then making my 3 last boards, which is going to be Eastern Europe and the 2 Americas. Let's get this board ready right there. Okay, don't want it to fall. Yes, Southeast Asia, again, a region similar to China in the sense that there are quite a lot of new stacks, but overall, just an overall fantastic roster shuffling period for this region as well. A lot of new rosters, whether it's brand new rosters or just players making moves. There is a lot to look forward to for this upcoming season. First of which being Boom, who after having a fantastic year, then had a bit of a disappointing performance at TI, which I would assume is what kind of catalyzed this change from their roster, that they didn't want to hold things together for the next season. They do hold together 2 of those players and their coach Mushi, those being Yopaj and FPZ. FPZ has been a part of this team for a very, very long time, but they unfortunately lose their players like Tims, Scam, and Jackie. They have replaced them with Natsumi, Zephyr, and Exova. Natsumi has been playing with Polaris for the past little while, which is a stack that has been gaining more and more traction over time, has been getting more and more recognition from the overall scene, which rightfully deserved. They've been playing fantastic for the past little while. We have Zephyr coming in from T1. Of course, again, a bit of a disappointing end to that organization, who will not be competing in this DPC season in Southeast Asia. And Xnova coming in, who previously had been playing with RNG for the past year or so. So yeah, I mean, you lose a lot of big name players like Tims, like Jackie, but you bring in Zephyr, Xnova, and Natsumi, and I think they feel pretty good about this. But again, similar to PSG.LGD, this is a roster that had a fantastic year, disappointing time at TI, are they still a major contender? Are they still a top 3 team in Southeast Asia? Because Southeast Asia has been getting way more competitive, especially near the top end, with more teams trying to crack into that top 3 and more teams falling out of it, like T1, and then of course Talon, SMG, Polaris, really trying to make it into that top 3. Is Boom still that top 3 team? And is Talon still that top 3 team, who also makes some roster changes, though not as much? They hold on to 23 Savage, Makoto, and Q. They unfortunately lose KP and of course Hyde, playing position 5. They also lose their coach, but they replace him with Sunbi, which I think is a roster change that not enough people are going to be talking about, quite frankly, because usually people don't talk about coaching changes all that much in the overall Dota 2 Pro scene. But Sunbi has been coaching some of the best teams in the DPC for half a decade at this point, coaching for a couple years with Team Secret. He then moved over to Fnatic, where he's been coaching for 3 years now, and now he's going to be on this new Talon squad that consists of Jabs playing in the off lane and Ollie coming in to play position 5. He, of course, being with Invictus Gaming for the past year, who again had a pretty disappointing time in the China region this past year, had a pretty good ending to the year, but other than that, pretty disappointing. But Ollie looking to bounce back from that, and I think that this is a pretty fantastic roster to do it with. I would put money on them being top 3, but again, love to know your guys' thoughts, especially when it comes to Fnatic, who, as I just talked about, lost their coach Sunbi, who had been with them for a few years at this point. They have yet to replace him. It's unclear whether or not they are going to be replacing Sunbi into this season. I would think that it would be good to, but as of right now, they sit as one of the few teams actually in Southeast Asia that currently does not have a coach. Their position 1, they obviously lost Raven in the offseason. They've gone ahead and replaced him with Gabby, who most recently was with T1, but of course was with Talon as well at the early portions of last year, which ultimately didn't work out. And KP coming into play in the offlane role, who's going to be replacing Jabs. So overall, again, you lose Raven and Jabs, which feels pretty bad. Those are some pretty huge players on your team, but you replace them with Gabby and KP. Do you think that that's enough for them to still be a contending team in Southeast Asia? They've certainly made the case, especially when it comes to their consistency, which has definitely been a huge part of Fnatic for the past few years, is that they have been very consistent. Very rarely do they peak really, really high and then drop really, really low in the standings. They have been consistently a top 2, top 3 team in Southeast Asia for a very long time. Will that continue to be the case into next year? And will a new team end up cracking into that top 3, where we have Blacklist, who's going to be picking up the RSG slot, who no longer will be participating in the DPC, and this brand new stack looks stacked, quite frankly. We have Raven coming in, who was previously on Fnatic, as we just talked about. Carl and Cuckoo, who were a part of T1, which I know everyone blames Cuckoo, but I feel like a part of that is a bit of memes. You would obviously love to have Cuckoo and Carl on your team, so that's fantastic. And then on the back end, we have Tims coming off of a fantastic year with Boom, and AU coming off of a mediocre year somewhat with Motivate. It has been quite a while since he has actually played a full season in the DPC, so I like this move quite a bit. Again, this is a fantastic looking roster. I can't really point out any weak points here. Maybe AU on position 5, but I mean, ultimately, I think this is a stack that can easily make a name for themselves being top 3 in this region. And again, just another one of the reasons why I'm so excited to watch this region, because you just look at like every team on the board and there's just so much talent to be found. It's really remarkable. Next up, another new squad. We have Bleed, who has purchased the DPC slot from T1, who will also not be competing, which is very unfortunate because T1 has had a lot of success over the past few years. It's really unfortunate that things kind of fell apart with them, but Bleed picks up where T1 left off with a brand new roster, bringing in Jackie from Boom. We then have Corden coming in. He has actually not played on any teams from what I can tell. His Liquipedia is completely blank. So if you guys know a little bit more about him, let me know. I'd love to know about it. But either way, he's going to be playing mid in an incredibly stacked region of mid laners. So we'll see if he's going to be able to keep up. We then have Masaros, who's coming in from Motivate Gaming. Playhard, who's going to be coming in after bouncing around between TNC Predator and Neon over this past year. And then Dubu coming in from TSM. He left that team. We didn't exactly know where he was going to end up. He ends up back in Southeast Asia on this brand new stack of players. And honestly, I like this a lot. And what I like even more, they're bringing in Forev to coach for them, which is a huge pickup. Again, I don't think enough people put emphasis. I don't think people put enough emphasis on how important coaching can be. Forev here, Sunbi here, maintaining Mushi over here, fantastic for these teams. I think it'll make a very big difference in how these teams play through the coming year. All right, next up, SMG. Unfortunately, also not able to dodge their roster shuffles. Raging Potato getting swapped out for Chidori, who is going to be playing position 1 now that mid 1 has actually moved into the offlane role. So that is now the third core role that he's going to be playing professionally. So we'll see how that ends up going. Chidori, of course, going to be coming in. He last played for Phoenix over in China. So we'll see how he's going to be able to bounce back. And Xavius, aka Boomy, coming in to play position 5, filling out a role that has been getting subbed out quite a bit for SMG. At the end of last year, it was Pylai Dai, but then during TI qualifiers, that was Paulison, who finds himself in China now. He's going to be coming in to play position 5 for them in this new stack. And overall, though there were some minor changes to this roster, I still see them as a very solid team. And again, I think a lot of this is going to depend on how the new players do in this roster, if they're able to adjust to the overall team chemistry, and if mid 1 is going to be able to adjust to the offlane role. We have seen a lot of core players move into the offlane from other core roles, and it can be very difficult because the play style can be very, very different. And also you have to expand your hero pool all over again, which can lead to a lot of growing pains. We saw that last year with Nightfall when he joined Evil Geniuses, making that swap from position 1 over to position 3. And his first few months, he would only play a handful of heroes, which if you can play them well is great, but it does leave you at a disadvantage in the drafting phase. You usually have to pick those early heroes very early in the draft because your hero pool is so small. So we'll see if mid 1's able to adjust. He has switched positions before. We'll see if he can do it again. I would put my money on yes. Next up, we have Execration coming in from the lower division, also making some very minor roster changes. They have swapped out RR for BDZ, who's going to be coming in. He has played over the past year with TNC Predator. So overall, I still see this as a team that should make a name for themselves. I don't necessarily know if I would say that they're a top 4 team, but a top 6, definitely something to be said there. This roster has done incredibly well in the lower division, so we'll see how they're going to be able to transition that into the upper division. And we have Tino coming back for his revenge tour against not only his old team, Boom, who dropped him, but also the carry player that replaced him, who's now on bleed. So that's exciting. And finally, we have Geek Fam, who has a brand new roster. They're going to be picking up the DPC slot from Lil Gun in the lower division. And they throw together a pretty interesting roster, to say the least. We have Skem, who's going to be coming in from Boom as a support, as a position 5. He is now going to be carrying this new stack. We then have Avatar Mode, aka Cokes. That's how I'm going to be pronouncing that because I don't want to get demonetized. But Avatar Mode is going to be coming in to play position 2 in the mid lane there. He previously was with OB Neon for the past year. We have Force coming in from Polaris, Narman coming in from Army Geniuses, and finally we have Raj coming in from the previous RSG stack that has since devolved. So yes, again, very similarly to China, a lot of movement, a lot of brand new rosters, 3 of them getting bought throughout this past year. Do you think that these teams have what it takes to make it top 3? Let me know what you guys think. And now I'm going to be cutting this and going to the next few boards. All right, and we're back. So next 3 boards here, moving on now to Eastern Europe, where we're going to be starting off with Virtus.Pro, who in comparison to last season is going to be coming into this with a brand new roster. Not something I think a lot of people were expecting, certainly not myself, especially when they had a roster who, sure, they underperformed. They didn't make it into the last chance qualifiers, but I mean, the region itself has been pretty disrupted over the past year, to say the least. And I thought for sure they would have held on to at least a few of them, you know, like GPK and DM, who ended up being the last members left on the team. I mean, I felt like they would have at least kept them. They are some fantastic players. But no. And whether or not that's because those players wanted to leave or because VP wanted this new roster, I would think that it's VP wanting the new roster because they didn't immediately kick those players. They kept them on the inactive roster. But yes, we have VP coming into this new roster where we have 5 brand new players, first of which being Koma, who has been bouncing around the Tier 2 and Tier 3 scene for quite a long time. He's been on teams like Chicken Fighters and, of course, Pari Parni and Luna Gaming over the past year. So we'll see if this is going to be his moment to get his big break on his first, like, huge team that's going to be playing as one of the favorites in an upper division in the DPC. We then have Squadix, who has played for teams like Wayfarers and Empire over the past year. Don't know too much about him, but I do know quite a bit about Noticed, who's going to be coming in to play offlane. He, of course, played for BetBoom over the past year. He, of course, had a bit of a disappointing time at TI with the squad. They didn't make it out of the group stage, but still a fantastic pickup for the offlane. Will he be able to outdo DM? Will it make it worth it getting rid of DM and GPK for Squadix and Noticed? I guess only time will tell. We then have Seiyu coming in to play position 4, who previously played for One Move. He had a pretty fantastic past year. And Ducalis, who has spent a majority of the past couple years with PuckChamp, and of course, most recently with Alliance for their TI qualifiers. That didn't work out, so he finds himself on this new VP squad. So yes, despite them going in a completely new direction, picking up a bunch of, I guess I could say like unknown players, because I don't think a lot of people that only watch the biggest teams will know who these players are, or at least that well. Like maybe players like Noticed and Ducalis, but still, I like this roster quite a bit. I think this could be a sleeper pick for an underdog to finish top 3, and it feels weird saying the VP is going to be an underdog, but when you look at their roster, again, I feel like most people won't be expecting them to do as well, and VP has had a tendency of throwing together rosters that just tend to work, very similar to PSG.LGD over in China. Next up, we have Na'Vi, who has largely retained the same roster from last season. V-Tune is returning to play position 1. They do lose no one, however, to play mid, but they bring in Nikki Cool, a player that has played on a few tier 3 teams over the past couple years, like Project Armor and Rune Eaters. We'll see how he's going to do with this. There are a lot of new mids on all of these teams. In fact, the only team that has the same mid that they had last season is Namiga, when we end up talking about them, which is kind of funny. So we'll see how he slides into the ranks amongst all the other mid laners in this region. Returning are the position 3 and 4 of Na'Vi, Lace, and Sweden Strong, and then Malady coming into play position 5. He was previously with Hellraisers, and once we get down to Hellraisers, we'll see that Hellraisers and Na'Vi essentially just traded position 5s solo, previously on Na'Vi, now on Hellraisers. So for Na'Vi, I think this is pretty good. Again, they finished pretty well at the end of last season, didn't end up making it to TI, but overall, I like this quite a bit. Will they still be a top team in Eastern Europe? We'll have to see over the coming months. Next up, we have Team Spirit, who shockingly actually made some roster changes. And I say shockingly because, you know, they had just won TI back at TI 10. They win the last major of last season. It looked like they were coming into this TI with all the momentum in the world to defend their championship, to defend the title. And then they get knocked out in the best of ones. And it seemed like things kind of ruptured from there, where we had their final team vlog where they talked about how pretty much everyone on the team was miserable. It felt like things were going to fall apart. They almost disbanded. They just wanted TI to be over, which, again, stark contrast with TI 10 in terms of like overall mentality and vibe. And I guess the issue mainly lied with Toronto Tokyo, because that is the player they ended up kicking. They make space for Laurel coming in from BetBoom to play mid there. I like this move quite a bit. Again, Toronto Tokyo, fantastic mid laner, but sometimes it just doesn't work when it comes to team chemistry, and it felt like that was the case. Laurel, I don't think, is going to be an like a downgrade by any means. Laurel's a fantastic mid laner, and I'm excited to see how Spirit does with this new adjustment. I'm hoping it's not one of those changes that can end up crippling a team. Rather, I hope this can be, at the very least, a band-aid fix, and they can at least stay at that same level that they've been for the past year or so. Next up, we got our brand new roster from Darkside. This is, of course, off of the BetBoom slot. So you'll notice that BetBoom is still in this DPC, still in the upper division, but it is technically under a different DPC slot, because when BetBoom initially came into the DPC, they had signed up with the Soneko stack up in Western Europe's upper division around Tour 2, I believe, is when they came in. And Soneko basically had a deal that he was going to be holding onto the DPC slot even as the org came in. And so when the org parted ways with the team after TI, Soneko retained that slot. He ends up making this new stack Darkside. BetBoom actually ends up buying into the DPC, buying that slot from Mind Games later on. So to get into Darkside now, we have Ramses coming into play position 1, which is absolutely insane because we didn't know if he was going to be coming back to play Virtus.Pro, and he's still, despite what some people might say, a fantastic carry player. Like, you would still love to have Ramses on your team, even though some people might say he's washed. You know, his prime was back at TI 7, TI 8 with VP, but still a fantastic player. Another fantastic player being Rebel, coming in previously on Hellraisers. He had a hell of a past season, has definitely made a name for himself. Definitely an up-and-coming mid laner of the region to keep your eye on if you are unfamiliar with him, although I'm sure any fans of this region are well aware of Rebel by now. We have DK Fogaz coming in to play position 3. He, of course, has been playing on teams like Empire and Cybercats over the past year, so not exactly the biggest teams, but he's still been pretty active over the past year or so, so this will be a pretty good break for him. And then coming in to return in the support roles, we have Roger, who played with BetBoom during TI, though he wasn't with BetBoom at the end of Tour 3, and then Soneko, as previously mentioned. The one question mark is actually their coach. Again, this is the same stack that's going to be coming in, but there's been no update on whether or not Mag is going to be returning as the coach, and there's been no update on that whatsoever. So there's been no mention that he's been kicked or let go, but again, no mention that he's been added as well. So I guess we'll see how that ends up going in the near future. Next up, we have one move that we're going to be talking about, who, of course, had a pretty great season last year. They're going to be bringing in Munkushi to replace Smiling Knight, who has actually gone all the way to South America, so we'll talk about that when we get there. Munkushi has had a pretty great year overall. He's played with teams like CIS Rejects and Pari Parni. Just like a few of his other teammates here, we have Ankrad coming in to replace Melojoule. He had a pretty fantastic year with Mind Games before they ended up dissolving. And finally, we have Gilger coming in replacing Seiyu, who is now going to find himself on that new VP squad. And Gilger also has been with Hellraisers for quite a while. This Hellraisers roster, though it's getting pretty much gutted, all of their players have ended up somewhere in the upper division of the DPC slot, which is pretty exciting because, again, they had a fantastic year. But once we start talking about Hellraisers, we'll see that, yeah, their roster kind of got tore apart a little bit. Next up, we have the new iteration of Bet Boom. Again, they purchased in, buying that slot from Mind Games, and this roster is also one that looks fantastic. These guys should be top 2 at the very least. Anything less than that, anything other than qualifying for the major, I'll say, would be a massive disappointment. You would likely see at least one player leaving the team if they don't make the first major. And that roster is going to be consisting of Pure, previously with Entity, though before that with Virtus.Pro / Outsiders. Fantastic carry player, up and coming. Some controversies there, but of course, a Russian company is not going to really care all that much about that. We then have GPK and Nightfall coming into play position 2 and 3. Nightfall coming back to Eastern Europe after having spent that year with EG and NA. And GPK, again, getting dropped by VP, so he finds himself on a new slot. Of course, a player like that is going to get picked up. We then have Save coming into play position 4, who has been on VP's inactive roster for a very, very long time. He's going to be finally entering the fray once again. And Toronto Tokyo playing position 5, and I talked about this in my announcement video. I don't think there are two roles that are more polar opposite to each other than mid and position 5, so that transition might be difficult. We'll see how he's able to adjust there. We'll see if, you know, his former teammates in Maposhka and Mira have influenced him enough to kind of get the idea of what he's supposed to do. He's still a fantastic player, and pro players tend to be pretty malleable, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say that it goes well. And for their coach, they brought in Bulk there as well. Anyways, so this roster looks fantastic. You guys can let me know, where do you place them among this upcoming season? I would say, again, at the very least top 2. Anything other than qualifying for the major, thus being top 3, would be a huge disappointment. But next up, talking about maybe a little bit disappointed for fans of this team, because this has now happened a few times where Hellraisers comes in through the lower division, they qualify for the upper division, and their roster is completely gutted. Though, I will say this time around, their roster does look pretty fantastic in replacement. So, the previous roster, of course, we had Watson, Rebel, Miero, we then had Gilger and Malady. We have since replaced those with Doc, who was previously with Bet Boom. Again, disappointing result at TI, but overall, the rest of the year, pretty fantastic. We have Depressed Kid, who has been with CIS Rejects and Pari Parni, similar to Munkushi over there. Miero staying on the team. We have Antares, who's coming over. He has played with Empire over the past year. And finally, we have Solo, who essentially, again, was traded from VP in exchange for Malady. So, again, the roster is pretty much completely different from what it was last year. But, I mean, are you complaining? This is a fantastic roster looking still. We'll see if it ends up coming together. These guys should be like a top team, I would say. I would say like at least top 4. But, you know, we've seen crazier things before, and we'll see. It really depends on how this team is able to really gel together into this upcoming year. And finally, last team on the board here, which I think technically is the only other team in the DPC other than Tundra that did not make a single roster change, which is pretty surprising for a team coming in from Div 2 to Div 1. Usually we'll see a couple players leave here and there. But they did add a new coach, so technically they did make a change, but their roster is going to be sticking pretty much the exact same with Kiritik, Malreen, we have Vazia, Hell, Scream, and finally So Bad, bringing in J4 to coach, who coached Into the Breach for over a year from March of 2021 all the way up until May of this year. He has been with a couple other teams, I believe, since then, but overall, what I'm just trying to get at is he's been coaching for quite a long time, so this pickup here makes a lot of sense. And honestly, I think Nemiga, sleeper pick for making it into a top spot, because again, staying together can have a huge benefit, especially when every other team in your region could have gone through some pretty significant changes that are going to take time to get used to. That's when you have teams like Nemiga really shine and really make a name for themselves, and who knows, maybe they make it to the first major. But that's going to do it for Eastern Europe, which means we're now going to be moving on to the Americas, starting off with North America, and apologies to fans and viewers from South America who always have to wait till the end, although in a video like this you can always just skip to the end. You don't necessarily need to stick around all the way through. But yes, we have North America, who has gone through a pretty big identity shift, it feels like, from last year. We of course had Evil Geniuses as an organization leave, though that stack is still very much the same now under a new tag, that being Shopify Rebellion. Quincy Crew has given away their DPC slot to a stack that we're going to be talking about. And Bait, a Ukrainian organization, has come into the upper division here. So yes, quite a lot going on in North America. We'll see what this ends up doing. And similarly to South America, do we see a sort of shift where organizations are more inclined to move to North America? Not necessarily for the player base, but for the opportunity of getting that Div 1 slot, getting that sort of financial reward for playing in a region that is not as competitive as, say, Western Europe or Southeast Asia. So yes, let's kick things off with our first team here. We have the Shopify Rebellion picking up the former EG squad, plus Saberlight from TSM coming into play offlane, and yes, Bulba will be coming to return to coach. And I think people screenshotted on Saberlight's first Twitch stream after joining this stack, his first game that he played Storm Spirit, and so I found that kind of funny. But yeah, new squad, again, very much the same as last year, replacing Nightfall with Saberlight. These guys should still be a top team. Again, these guys should still be a major, and with Quincy Crew not being in the DPC anymore, that just gives them an even better shot, because that was one of the three teams that was mainly cycling through in the majors. It was Quincy, EG, and TSM. With Quincy gone, that now alleviates a little bit of pressure. But where did that Quincy stack go? Well, we saw a lot of members from that stack kind of part ways. We have Leslau actually sticking in the region. We'll talk about him next. Quinn goes over to Gaming Gladiators in Western Europe, and MSS signs up with Old G for the open qualifiers in Western Europe. So that just left Yawar and Fada, who currently do not have a team for this upcoming season. Maybe I'll do a video as well of some of the players that didn't find themselves on a team for this coming year, because there are a few quite notable names like Yawar, like Fada, like Ice, who did not find themselves on a team this year. So replacing them, well, we actually don't know. They don't actually have a team name yet, but they do have a roster featuring mainly of players that do not have a Liquipedia page, and I could not find any records of them having played in the DPC before, which is going to be interesting to say the least. Will they, have an easy time? Will they not? The only player that is recognizable is their mid laner, ESK or Escape, who had played with Wildcard Gaming over the last year. But other than that, we have Lame playing position 1, Napkin position 3, 9, not to be confused with 9 over on Tundra, because his I is spelled with a 1, and Lil Script, who is the owner of the DPC slot from Quincy Crew. So yeah, really no idea what to expect. Again, I couldn't really find anything on any of these players. And yeah, we'll see how they end up doing in this new season. Again, NA it feels pretty wide open, but is it this wide open where a team like this can finish top 2? Who knows? But yes, let's talk about Nouns now, who have also gone through some roster changes. It feels like every year they tend to lose just a couple more players, where we have mainly Gunner talking about how he's going to be exploring other teams, and I guess nothing really comes of that, and he ends up right back where he started. But coming in to play carry, we have Eve, aka Yamson, who's coming in from Wildcard last year. Pretty great season for him. That team was starting to break into that top 3 alongside Nouns, as I was talking about earlier with TSM, EG, and Quincy. Didn't quite make it through, but overall Yamson, a fantastic pickup. Gunner and Moo are returning for mid and offlane. We then have Leslau getting picked up from the former Quincy Crew stack to play position 4, so slight role change there, although he has played position 4 before. And Husky is going to be returning to play position 5. There is no coach for this stack, nor is there a coach for the last stack I talked about so far. In NA, we'll see if that is to change over the next few weeks. But for now, this stack, again, can't really complain. They lose Costabile and Z-Freak, but I can't say it's exactly much of a downgrade when you end up picking up one of the better carry players in the region from another team that was also very competitive, and Leslau, who has been around the scene, one of the more reliable players overall. He won't exactly have the most flashy plays, he won't exactly carry a game, but he'll give you those consistent results. Next up, we have TSM, who went through a surprising amount of changes. It feels like a lot of the teams that had disappointing results at TI, that was ultimately what influence these teams to have as many changes as they did, as they end up with 3 brand new players on their roster despite having a pretty fantastic year overall. I mean, Tour 3 was a pretty big disappointment as well. You know, they finished 4th place in the region when they should have been arguably at least top 3, but you know, sometimes that happens. But regardless, they have a new roster. Tomato and Bryle are coming back to play position 1 and 2 respectively, but instead of Saberlight in the offlane, who finds himself on the new Rebellion stack, we have Kassane coming in to play with them. He has played with stacks like V Gaming over in Eastern Europe over the past little bit, so he's going to be making that transition to NA. We'll see how he's able to adjust to the region. We have Ari coming in from Into the Breach, the only member from Into the Breach that actually left the team this coming time. He's going to be playing position 4, and Whitemon coming in to replace Dubu on position 5. He's, of course, coming in from T1, so he's coming from SEA over to NA. Dubu goes from NA over to SEA again, so pretty exciting. And Moonmeander, their new coach for the team. Again, I kept him in blue, so he is technically staying with the team, though he has gone through that role change. No longer going to be on the active roster, now going to be taking that head coaching role. So we'll see how this ends up doing. Again, Moonmeander, I like the idea of bringing in a coach from within the roster, because that coach will understand the dynamic of the roster, the dynamic of the players. But with so many new players on that roster, how easy will it be to adjust? And will TSM still be that top team in the region? Speaking now of top teams in the region and whether or not they will be, because I really have no idea what to expect from this next team, and that is Bait, who moves all the way to North America from Eastern Europe, of course, trying to dodge the ongoing situations in Ukraine and Russia right now. Totally understandable, safety first, of course. They pick up that DPC slot from Wildcard, who you will notice very similarly to BetBoom is still in the DPC despite getting rid of their DPC slot because they bought in, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But yes, Bait buys in from that Wildcard slot from last year. They put together a roster that mixes players from a whole bunch of regions. We have, of course, Dendi, Funnick, Lodin, players from Ukraine. We have Stonebank, who has been playing in North America, though he is from Ukraine as well. And then we have Moose from South America, Peru specifically, coming in to finish this roster. And honestly, I don't know what to expect, because Bait has been getting booted out of the lower division of Eastern Europe just over and over and over again, having an incredibly hard time to keep rosters together, to keep consistent results, and now they're in an upper division. For the first time in their DPC career, they are in an upper division. It is North America. It is going to be a little bit easier, but again, Division 1 in North America is still stronger than Division 2 in Eastern Europe. Will they be able to keep their head above water? I think that they have the talent there. But again, you're going to need to see those results, which Bait has not had over the past few years. Next up, we have 5rat 4 staff, who also goes through some minor roster changes. We have DNM coming into play position 1 again. Speed making that role swap from mid lane to the off lane with Lil Nick's departure. He's going to be getting replaced by Kits. Kits has been playing for teams like The Cut and Dogchamp over the past year. We then have Stominen, who's coming all the way from Western and Eastern Europe. He, of course, has been playing with teams like Brame and Alliance. We then have Panders coming into coach as well. No real info on Panders, what his career is like so far. But again, the idea of a coach, you can never go wrong with a coach. You're not penalized for having a coach by any means. It's just one extra person to pay, but still, I like that a lot. Returning to the roster again, DNM, Speed moving into the off lane now from mid, and Albino Zebra remaining as their position 5. Looking now at Alpha, a team coming in from the lower division in North America. We have Rises, Soul, and Monster. All 3 of their core players are returning once again, but we do have new supports. Coming in to replace Flea, we have We, so it rhymes there. Flea, of course, moving over to Wildcard, which we'll talk about very shortly, but We coming in from SG Esports, having been there for quite a long time. He's going to be moving over to NA now. And Yadomi, he's going to be coming in, replacing Pingu from last season, and he has been playing largely with Gorilla Pride down in South America as well. So 2 players from SA now moving to NA. Same thing for Moose, although he has dipped in NA before. So we'll see how Alpha is going to be able to do in this region. Nothing here to tell me that they're going to get demolished by any means. So it'll be a matter of finishing top 6 at the very least. And you know what? Maybe even finishing top 4. We'll see. And the last roster that we're going to be talking about in NA before we move down to South America, we have Wildcard Gaming, who, yes, they sold their DPC slot to Bait, but then they bought in again with the KBU.US DPC slot, and they throw together a roster that consists largely of brand new members. We have Arc, who's coming in, who was on that previous KBU.US stack. So he is the only remaining member from that stack that is actually getting bumped up now to Div 1. But Sammy Boy is returning, still the owner of the technically the wildcard tag in North America. But coming in to play mid, we have Baby Tick, Sunlight in the offlane, and Flea coming over from Alpha to play position 4. So will this still be a team as competitive as last year's wildcard was, where wildcard was consistently able to finish top 5, which I know by NA standards is not anything crazy, but it's still, there was a clear defining line of where teams lied, and wildcard was able to get above a few of the teams that really struggled to get a foothold in the upper division. Will that still be this team, or will this team get sent right back down to the lower division? I'd love to know your guys' thoughts about anything in this, and I'd love to see your guys' predictions on these regions, as well as where you think teams are going to end up placing by the end of the season. But now we are on to our very last board here in this video. And apologies, I didn't go over any Div 2 stuff or open qualifier stuff like stacks like Old G. I can maybe do that in a video, including players that didn't get picked up this season. But for now, this is going to be today's video. And we're going to be getting into South America, which has been a pretty exciting offseason, honestly, for South America. And for fans of the region and players of the region, you've got to be pretty happy with some of the big name organizations that have now stepped into the scene, despite the fact that a few orgs also stepped away from the scene, like SG Esports. But yes, Thunder Awaken, they lose their entire roster due to roster changes where half of it goes to Beast Coast, half of it goes to EG, but they still throw together a roster that looks like it can be pretty competitive. Is it top 2 material? Not sure, because honestly, there's a lot of rosters in this region that look fantastic, but top 4? Probably, honestly. We have Smiling Knight coming in from Eastern Europe. He was previously on One Move, who had a pretty fantastic year in the upper division of Eastern Europe. We have Alone, Michael, and Axel all coming in from Infamous's previous roster, even Michael having played a little bit with Infinity over the past year, and Illick coming in from 5-Man Midas, who has since dissolved as a team going forward. And yeah, honestly, again, these are all players that have played in Div 1 before, some of which from different regions. We have Illick, who has played in NA for a little bit. We'll see how he's able to adjust. He does have offlane role, which maybe doesn't have as much pressure on it as like a mid role or a carry role, but still, we'll see how he's able to adjust. And Thunder Awaken, despite losing their entire roster, which got them into top 6 at TI, I still like their chances of being a team that could, by the end of Tour 1, end up being a favorite, or maybe even finishing top 2. I'd love to know your guys' thoughts about this, especially those that watch this region more often than other ones, because I feel like you guys are a little bit more opinionated. You guys tend to be very opinionated about who you cheer for in SA, but regardless, I would love to know your guys' thoughts about this, which brings us now to Beast Coast, who went through the roster changes. They finally did it. After being together as a squad for over 3 years, that squad has now been broken up, though it is still largely the same. So it's not as big as like a full-on all 5 players going 5 different places. We still have 3 players of the roster staying the same, including K1 Hector, Gojira, aka Schofield, and Stinger. We even have Coach Valky coming back for another season. But who do they replace Chris Luck and Whisper with? Even though it sucks to lose them, well, you bring in some players who finished top 6 at TI. That's who. You got Dark Mago and Sacred coming in to fill out that roster. So again, even though this legendary SA roster falls apart a little bit, you know, you have 2 players that end up leaving. It kind of sucks, especially a player like Whisper, who is a real talent, a real gem, but you bring in Dark Mago and Sacred. So how bad can you really feel? Honestly, and that's a question to fans of Beast Coast in particular. How do you feel about these changes? Again, with a roster that had been together for such a long time, they were technically in themselves infamous. Yeah. Love to know your guys' thoughts. And speaking of Infamous, we have their new roster, which largely consists of the former Tempest roster that has since been bought out. That roster, of course, consisting of players like MNZ, Sladen, and MJZ, who are coming in to replace the former roster of Infamous. We also have Sladems coming in to play mid. No real record of Sladems in his competitive career, so we'll see how he's going to be able to do, playing a critical role like the mid lane in SEA. Can be a real hit or miss. Oscar is the only remaining member from the last season that's going to be sticking around on this roster. And of course, the former roster, we have Parker, who finds himself on Infinity now, that we'll talk about. Alone ends up on the new Thunder Awaken stack. Same thing for Axel, and same thing for Michael. So yeah, Infamous kind of getting their roster gutted thanks to Thunder Awaken. Okay, Alliance. Yes, Alliance now has well, technically it's called Alliance Latin America, but they do have a South American team now, which is, again, another big team that we're going to be talking about very shortly, buying into this region, bringing some more credibility to this region, which I think is very, very much deserved. This region has been slept on for, I think, a few too many years at this point. Definitely around TI9, there was a huge resurgence of just pure talent, and the Dota is just so fun to watch. And now we're finally starting to see that pay off in the big scheme of things, where we have Lumiere coming into play position well, Analog, Vitali, Theolacor, and Gardic filling out this roster. Essentially the former Hikori roster that Alliance has just come in and picked up since Hikori has left the scene. And that's how Alliance ends up in this position where they're able to actually be in Div 1 of the DPC as well. So fantastic roster, though Hikori didn't exactly have a amazing season last season. They still finished top 4, which is pretty fantastic. They were kind of close to finishing top 2. We'll see if they can get there with this next level. And I'm curious if they're actually going to set up like a full-on boot camp with Alliance now, because I don't know if that was a luxury that Hikori was able to afford to these players, but you'd think that an org like Alliance would be able to do that. And if they did, that could be a huge boost in the play that these guys have in this upcoming season. But speaking of huge news, we have Evil Geniuses moving to South America, got that mixed up. And they throw together a hell of a roster. Very similarly with Beast Coast, they kind of merge those two rosters, Beast Coast and Thunder Awakened, together. And I gotta say, I think I favor this one a little bit more. I feel like they got the slightly better players out of the mix. The first of which, Pakaz, fantastic player. No disrespect to K1 Hector by any means, but Pakaz has just shown that he's able to play a fairly small amount of heroes very, very well. So even though it can be easy drafting against them, and that was one thing that Thunder Awakened had against them, was drafting against them felt kind of easy, they could still beat you with a draft that was out-strategized, and they would make it look very easy. So Pakaz, big part of that. I like that pickup. Same thing for picking up Chris Luck and mainly Whisper. Again, I talked about it very briefly when we talked about Beast Coast, but Whisper, a total gem. When Beast Coast was ever owning, it was largely due to Whisper just having the team on his back. He was just that good. And we have Matthew and Pandubu rounding out the back end in the support role, again, previously with Thunder Awakened. We also have Vintage, previous coach of Thunder Awakened, coming in to coach for this squad as well. So yeah, I like this a lot. I don't see really like any holes in this roster. You have members that finish top 6 at TI. You have the best members, in my opinion, of Beast Coast coming into play. And so it's just going to be a matter of if those players are going to be able to come together and play and put together a hell of a strategy, and just dominate the region. Because, you can have a roster like this, but if you can't finish top 2, you can't make it to a major, then it really doesn't matter, right? Okay, moving on to Wolf. We have 2 new players on Wolf. They lose HFN and I believe one more player. Yeah, they lose Duster and replace him with KJ. KJ has been playing with teams like Wolf, so he's returning to the squad. He's also been on No Ping over the past year, and Costabile coming in from Nouns, coming back to South America to play with Wolf. I like these moves quite a bit. Again, kind of sucks that they have to go through some roster changes, but this roster still looks pretty good last season. They were able to avoid relegation last season, so hopefully they can start inching their way towards the top of the DPC in South America. Moving on now to Infinity, who actually buys into a previous slot. They took the No Runes. No Runes was supposed to be a team coming in from the lower division into the upper division. Infinity buys their slot back because Infinity was actually supposed to get relegated last season, so they're back. Technically, this should be a new org, like it should be written in green like the other ones, but I've kept it largely the same because the Infinity stack still consists of 3 of the same members if you include the coach. Position 4 and 5, we have Jenik and Prada coming back. Mariano actually switching from the offlane to the coaching role, which is exactly the same as what Moon Meander did, other than the role swapping. The roles were slightly different, but yes, he's going to be sticking around the team. But we have 3 new members. First of which, Parker, who's going to be coming off of a year of bouncing between Infamous and Infinity. He's now back on Infinity. Leo Style, who's coming in to replace PP, who now finds himself on Ravens, which a really dumb name, honestly. I can't say it in a video without sounding ridiculous. But yes, he's going to be coming in, and Leo Style, of course, over the past year has been bouncing around through a bunch of teams like Lava, No Ping, and Infamous. And finally, we have Frank replacing Mariano in that offlane role since he's moved to coach, who has also been bouncing around on teams like Lava, like Infamous, and also SG Esports, who finds themselves out of the DPC for this season. So yeah, honestly, can't really complain about this roster. They get back Parker, who I think when they got rid of Parker initially, Infinity, I didn't like that move a lot because it felt like Parker was really the motor behind this team. He was really a fantastic player. and he is now back on the roster. And finally, ending things off with the last team that we're going to be talking about today, we have Ravens coming in from the lower division with largely the same roster as last year. They lose out on Yengo Flo and replace him with PP coming in from Infinity to play the mid lane. So not a whole lot of changes there, which again is kind of unusual for teams coming in through the lower division. I talked about it very briefly with Nemiga, but yeah, that's going to do it. That is all of the roster changes that have happened within the upper division in the DPC. If you want me to do one regarding Div 2, or if you want me to cover teams that are coming in through the open qualifiers like Old G, or if you just want me to make a video where I talk about all of the players that didn't get picked up this coming year, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. I'm going to be traveling over the next week, so uploads might be few and far between. I do want to do a video explaining the format of the DPC, how it works, how majors work. So I think that's something that I'll be trying to upload within this week, but just a heads up, I might not be uploading as much this week, but I want to get back to it as much as possible. So yes, thank you guys so much for watching. This has been, I think, my longest video I've ever done. So if you enjoyed it, please be sure to like, share, subscribe, hit the bell so you're always notified when I'm uploading. Thank you guys so much for watching. Your support means the world to me. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys later.